morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar on EU Taxonomy Guidelines, brought to you by EPRA in collaboration with KPMG. My name is Hassan Sabir. I'm the Finance and ESG Director at EPRA. I'll be joined today by Raluca Karp-Hengi and Sandy Seisman from KPMG France. So to set the base for today's webinar, I wanted to present the context behind the EU taxonomy, which was born out of the 2018 European Commission Action Plan for Financing Sustainable Growth. So this EU taxonomy was part of certain initiatives set out by the European Commission, which also included EU green bonds, incorporating sustainability in financial advice, sustainable benchmarks, sustainability ratings and market research, also clarifying the duty of asset managers and institutional investors while investing in sustainability, supporting the EU prudential rules for banks and insurance, and also fostering sustainable disclosure and sustainable corporate governance. So we're in 2023 now, and as the EU's action plan has been unraveling over the years, we are now into today's discussion would be around the second part of the EU taxonomy, which is around the four environmental pillars. Regarding the EU taxonomy itself, EPRA has been working and supporting its membership on, firstly, the advocacy side of things, but also on understanding the EU taxonomy itself. So in 2022, when the European Commission published the full KPIs on the EU Article 8, EPRA and KPMG published the first edition of the EU Taxonomy Guidelines, accompanied by an FAQ document and also supporting webinar. In 2023, when the European Commission published the remaining climate taxonomy objectives, EPRA has been working with KPMG in producing a set of updated guidelines, which have been published today and which is supported by today's webinar. So just in summary, we have the climate taxonomy. New technical screening criteria have been introduced for 12 economic activities. Just a reminder, the climate taxonomy involves climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation. Earlier this year, the environmental taxonomy was introduced, which covers protection of water, pollution, circular economy, and biodiversity. And of course, the overarching concepts that go with both climate taxonomy and environmental taxonomy are the disclosure requirements and minimum safeguards. So let us dive deep into the detail of the changes that the European Commission has brought in. And for that, I will now hand over to Sandy Seisman from KPMG. Sandy, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. So when I introduced the first edition of the EU Taxonomy Guideline 9 months ago, my keywords were consistency and reliance of the non-financial indicators to report. Today, for this second edition, my keyword will be action, as this is, of course, the first objective of the regulations. And this is taking all its sense with the new objective, as Hassan mentioned, which is the transition to a circular economy. So I will hand over to Raluca for the presentation of this new guideline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy and Hassan. Hello, everyone. I'm Raluca Karp-Hengi, Managing Director with KPMG Luxembourg. And today presenting you the current updates of the EU Taxonomy Regulation and guidelines that EPRA has previously released for you. And before deep diving into what is new in the regulation today, we also believe that it's important at this stage to take a step back and also reflect on, regulatory timelines and regulatory environment in general, and give you a full overview of other regulations that are somehow interacting with the EU taxonomy and that different market participants are currently I would say even struggling to report on. And the first regulation, very briefly to introduce to you, is the SFDR regulation, which has entered into force in two phases. For the level 1 with general periodic disclosures back in 2022, and earlier of this year, from 1st of January 2023, with the obligation of funds, and not only to disclose the RTS, and also to start preparing the periodical report for the fund to report on their own activities. Why did we mention SFDR also to you today? Because part of the SFDR framework could be either certain KPIs that funds, either UCITS or IFMs, are seeking for to report at their level. And when I'm talking about KPIs, I'm also thinking about, principal adverse impacts that they might be looking from corporates such as yours, but also EU taxonomy alignment that they would be seeking either for an Article 9, for example, framework, or for an Article 8 fund to comply, for example, with MiFID II regulation. So to give you just the overview of the interaction with the SFDR. Now, obviously, EU taxonomy, we will deep dive into that into further slides. And then the other regulation we clearly wanted to mention today was the UCITS and IFMD Delegated Act that requires asset managers actually to include, and fund managers to include in their risk management process the analysis, the monitoring, and the reporting of sustainability risks. And this regulation is also important because it demands the assessment of sustainability risks, not only for Article 8 or Article 9 funds, so for ESG funds, but also for non-ESG funds. So even if, for example, certain ESG funds are invested in companies which are not, looking towards a heavy transition towards ESG. Nevertheless, these sustainability risks need to be assessed, and data will be required for the CROs to be able to monitor and produce what the regulators are looking after. In terms of MiFID II or IDD disclosures, clearly the regulation adds on top the sustainability preferences of investors. So the obligation of banks and distributors of funds to actually request from clients their sustainability risks. And one of the requirements, I would say, for a fund to be compliant, meaning to be distributed to investors as an ESG fund for their sustainable preferences, is, of course, the alignment with the EU taxonomy. So again, the importance of the regulation. CSRD, and I know most of you should already be working on looking into the details of the corporate sustainability reporting. I believe this is extremely important and goes hand in hand actually with the EU taxonomy, even in terms of timeline of reporting. But at the level of corporates, obviously, we are talking about the alignment with the EU taxonomy, right? And potentially the analysis of your activities and how your own activities are actually influencing either the exterior or the environment. So we are talking about the double materiality concept, where EU taxonomy framework could also support you to obviously identify what is green and also the harm or the impacts on the environment. CSRD is also important, and we have also mentioned some points linked to this in the next couple of slides, because, for example, for financial institutions, under CSRD, and are also under Pillar 3, they will need to report their green asset ratio and also certain KPIs, KRIs linked to the assets under management. And the eligibility for assets to be reported under these two frameworks are actually given by the EU taxonomy. So again, the importance for the EU taxonomy reporting and alignment of companies in general for the financial sector reporting as well. Last and not least, another regulation that is currently in a draft, the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence, with the aim to foster basically sustainable and responsible corporate behavior, and to actually anchor human rights and environmental considerations in companies' operations and corporate governance. So more, I would say, insights on the due diligence on the value chain, already questioned by this CSRD, and even further by this CSDDD, which is estimated to be final expected application around 2025. With this in mind, we can pass on to maybe the next slide, but I wanted to ask my colleague, Julie, who is our sustainability lead in Luxembourg, if you wanted to add something else with regards to the regulatory timeline.
No, what is maybe important just to highlight is that the regulatory timeline will continue to also evolve in 2024, because there are different consultations ongoing, mainly on the SFDR side, including also the revision potentially of the principal adverse impact calculation. And on the CSRD, we are also still expecting to have some clarification on the specific sector standard that will arrive normally only in 2025. And finally, to conclude on the EU taxonomy side, the EU taxonomy will also continue to evolve, because we are also expecting additional guidelines, but we will also highlight this further into the next slides of the presentation. So thanks.
Thank you, Julie. And for consistency purposes in the presentation, we wanted to give a high-level overview of the EU taxonomy. Hassan already mentioned to you the updates of the regulation. So in the first guidelines that EPRA has issued, and where we have also supported, we have deep dived into the first two objectives, right? The climate change mitigation and adaptation, where we also saw that with the new releases of the regulation, there were certain updates that we have also highlighted in the new release of the guidelines. And most important, the overview of the newly released, I would say, technical screening criteria for the last four objectives, high level for 3 of them, and a more deep dive into the circular economy. Why is that? Also because we have observed that actually it's the circular economy objective that is impacting the real estate sector. Nevertheless, we have a high-level presentation of the other 3 objectives. And with this in mind, we can move on to the next slide. Again, we wanted visually to place EU taxonomy somehow even at the center of the regulatory agenda, with information being fed obviously to the CSRD, because of the reporting and because of the requirements of CSRD, information being fed to the SFDR as well, and also to the MiFID II. So we wanted again to emphasize the importance of the EU taxonomy and the importance of companies to actually start working first on the eligibility and then on the alignment, and not only to report, let's say, statically on the alignment, but also to consider how they could transition to improve their KPIs in terms of a percentage of alignment of their businesses. And to give more insights about how the EU taxonomy interacts with other regulations in terms of requirements and potential opportunities, we can move on to the next slide. I mentioned before that for financial institutions, EU taxonomy is extremely important when it comes to the reporting of the green asset ratio and certain KPIs, obviously on turnover, capex, and opex for the asset managers. These ratios, we also believe that the banks will start very much looking at them, in the sense that the banks, they will be extremely interested going forward to improve their green asset ratio as well. We see already on the Luxembourg and European markets that banks have started to assess, on one hand, what their asset and asset management assets under management bases are, and we are also seeing that for their own transition and to reach their net zero targets that most of them have adhered to, they are inclining in mainly providing green loans, for example, right, or issuing mainly green bonds. So for this purpose, the financial market participants will be extremely interested in your own analysis and in your own KPIs to see whether the counterparties are actually fitting with also their own strategy. Another point to mention here regarding banks, we also saw with a couple of larger banks at European level that their ESG analysis for granting green loans or to grant loans that help companies transition is so the framework for loan granting is basically made similar to the EU taxonomy analysis. So the EU taxonomy framework is the core of their own analysis and what they want to implement, also obviously to improve this green asset ratio that they are very much keen on. I mean, that they need to report and very much keen on improving. In terms of the SFDR requirements, so we mentioned that for Article 8 funds, one of the criteria for the funds to be MiFID II compliant, to be distributed as sustainable products, is for that product to follow EU taxonomy. And then particularly for Article 9 funds, we see in practice that the EU taxonomy steps are actually fitting perfectly with the framework that an Article 9 requires. So we are talking about the substantial contribution, the do not significant harm, and also of the minimum safeguards requirement. So very often we see it in practice for funds. On the CSRD requirements, obviously companies obliged to report on CSRD. They are also obliged to report under the EU taxonomy, and the scope is a phased-in scope. So we will have even more and more companies to report under the CSRD. I would say that if I were to make a parallel between the financial institutions and CSRD and EU taxonomy, is that one of the main challenges is this phased in and access to data, right? Because whilst banks obviously need already to report on GAR and their Pillar 3 requirements, for the CSRD, we still do not have a large scope of implementation yet. So banks are struggling actually with access to data, just because companies are not yet obliged to have this reporting in place. In terms of opportunities, we wanted to mention an opportunity that exists on the Luxembourg market. For example, is a reduction of the subscription tax for a certain type of funds if their portfolio is aligned with EU taxonomy. We can also tell you that in practice, it is difficult to have very high percentages for the moment, also because of the phased-in approach for implementation of CSRD and EU taxonomy. Obviously, another opportunity is supporting the transition in the real estate sector, where the EU taxonomy sets certain thresholds to actually define the sustainable activities, obviously through the technical screening criteria, and thus pushing the market players to consider the sustainability matters together with financial indicators to create a bigger value of their assets. And last and not least is also preparing for more stringent financing conditions in the future. And I was talking before about the loans, but also about the European Green Bond Standard, which actually have as base companies that are aligned with the EU taxonomy. So again, to emphasize the importance of the EU taxonomy. I think another point to add is the overall assurance aspect of CSRD, and also including EU taxonomy, that is taking a lot of space and a lot of discussions amongst even us as auditors, I would say, but also for you as corporates and market participants, also for the banks, because we are not talking only about non-financial reporting, but we are talking about a report where quality of data processes will be and are extremely important to be able to have a clean audit opinion. Julie, I'm not sure you want to add something for this slide.
Nothing specific. It's quite complete. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we can move on to the next slide. We wanted also to emphasize the EU taxonomy reporting as part of disclosure requirements for both CSRD and SFDR. For corporates, as we all know, the CSRD extends the scope of NFRD, and we will see the phased-in approach in the next couple of slides. And EU taxonomy information will be included in the management report and not in a separate report. And we are obviously talking about the aligned and eligible activities for turnover, CapEx, and OpEx. Quite detailed, I would say. And on the other side, for the funds, why they are requiring this information is that even at their own level, in their own periodical report, they need to report as well on the EU taxonomy KPIs. So market participants are requiring the same type of information. To move on to the next slide. And coming to the EU Taxonomy Regulation, and I am sure most of you already are aware from the previous guidelines about the steps to report on EU taxonomy. We are first talking about the eligibility, so the economic activities, the assessment of the eligible NACE codes, I would say, based on the list of eligible NACE codes from the EU taxonomy guidelines, mapped according to your own internal NACE codes. And most important is to really understand that, what is really behind those NACE codes, what activity is really behind to ensure that that particular activity is eligible according to the EU taxonomy. Once this step is assessed, you then move on to demonstrating a substantial contribution to one of the objectives. Clearly now we have technical screening criteria for all objectives, right? Last time we have deep dive into climate change mitigation and adaptation, and for this time we will deep dive. My colleague Lucy will introduce you to the circular economy example, because from our own assessment, by looking at the eligible activities for the EU taxonomy and for the new technical screening criteria, for the new 4 objectives, we have observed that the economic activities relevant for the real estate sector are applicable only for the circular economy. Then do not significant harm, however, for this particular step, for example, for the transition to a circular economy, we have now to demonstrate, and we have technical screening criteria requirements for the other 5 objectives. So what you need to demonstrate and to assess that while going for the alignment with and towards circular economy, you do not significantly harm the other 5 objectives. And last and not least, compliance with the minimum safeguards, which is a similar step as for climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, in line with OECD guidelines and UN Global Compact, that we will also deep dive into the further slides. We can move on to the next slide. And here we wanted to emphasize exactly how you will read the guidelines. So what we have done was to actually take the initial release and work on it in adding what was new from the regulation with regards to the new objectives. So you would find in the new guidelines new pages reflecting information on the new 4 objectives. So we have added this icon mentioning that it's a new page in the guidelines. And also we have actually gone through the content of the previous guidelines and have updated where necessary with what the regulation has released as new. So in the older slides of the guidelines, whenever there were any updates from the regulation, we have put on an icon to emphasize the fact that the slide is changed compared to last time. So this is the way you should read, I would say, the document. You are very much aware of the current content. So I am sure reading through the circular economy will be as easy, at least to go through. Moving on to the next slide. Is to emphasize again what are the updates, I would say. So we have 4 new objectives for which we have new technical screening criteria. We have obviously detailed only the one relevant for the real estate in the guidelines and also in the next slides. So we have provided examples when it comes to the alignment exercise only for the circular economy point. Now, if I'm looking at the economic activities, even for the circular economy, we have also some new economic activities, and we have given you the example of the construction of new buildings, and this was also present for CCM and CCA, renovation of existing buildings as well, present for CCM and CCA, and we have also added a practical example, the one for demolition and wrecking of buildings and other structures. Obviously, if you require more insights on practical examples with regards to other economic activities linked to the that are eligible for the objective of circular economy, we can treat that in the Q&A section. So this would be with totally new information that the regulation has issued. And with regards to the climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, we have basically new amendments that include technical screening criteria for 12 new economic activities that are covering 6 industries, and as well as new elements that we need to consider regarding the do not significant harm criteria for the renovation of the building. So important to review and revisit the updates of the regulation with regards to these 2 points. If we move on to the next section, and of course, in the meantime, if you have any particular questions, please drop them in the Q&A chat. We will also have Q&As towards the end of the session, depending on how much time we have left. Thank you for that. So if we move on to the next slides, we wanted to have a high-level introduction of the three objectives that actually do not impact the real estate sector, given the fact that from our own analysis, we identified that there are no economic activities linked to the real estate sector. So if we take, for example, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, we wanted to give you some examples in which technical screening criteria have been introduced for this activity. And I will simply mention restoration and remediation of water and marine resources, for example, or water supply. We will let you deep dive into the regulation and updates directly from the guidelines. Now, obviously, if we move on to the next one, we are talking about the circular economy and the fact that this one clearly is impacting the real estate sector. We are talking about economic activities that we have seen before, such as construction of new buildings or renovation of existing buildings, but we are also talking about new economic activities eligible and for which we have technical screening criteria for the alignment, such as the demolition and wrecking of buildings and other structures, maintenance of roads and motorways, and use of concrete in civil engineering. Now, for all of these economic activities, as mentioned, we have technical screening criteria for the substantial contribution, but also for the do not significant harm linked to all the other objectives of the EU taxonomy. So it's becoming a bit more cumbersome to demonstrate also the do not significant harm, also because now with the new four objectives release, we actually need to demonstrate that do not significant harm for additional 5, whereas last year we were more on only demonstrating either for climate change mitigation or adaptation that do not significant harm. So the complexity increased slightly, I would say. Now, I would leave maybe the floor to my colleague Lucy to deep dive with you into a concrete example. A concrete example linked to the construction of new buildings and how to demonstrate the alignment towards the circular economy, do not significant harm, but also the minimum safeguard step. Lucy, I leave the floor to you.
Yes, thanks, Raluca. So if you move to the next section, so from the new Environmental Delegated Act, we learned that the circular economy reflects the need to promote an efficient use of the resources through appropriate reuse and recycling of those resources. So it means that the technical screening criteria should aim at preventing or reducing waste generation, increasing the preparation of reuse and recycling of waste and the disposal of such waste. So applied to the real estate sector, we know that the construction and demolition of buildings is responsible for around 37% of waste in the European Union. This is why ensuring that the materials that are used in the construction and maintenance process of the buildings that all these materials come from a reused or recycled material, so meaning the secondary raw materials, can therefore play a very important role in the transition to a circular economy. So the technical screening criteria that are used to demonstrate the substantial contribution to the transition to a circular economy are set out in the Annex 2 of this Environmental Delegated Act. And for more practicality, we summarize them into decision trees that you can see here for the activity construction of new buildings. So as introduced by Raluca, we will go through the example of this activity. So for construction of new buildings, it basically consists of 5 main points that we summarize here. The first one encompasses the 3 first boxes that you can see on the slide and relates to the treatment of construction and demolition waste under certain frameworks that are listed in the criteria and thresholds. The last one, so really the third box, refers to the European list of waste, and the taxonomy includes the link in order to go use the said reporting tables. So those are the first steps that you need to check for demonstrating the substantial contribution to circular economy. Then the second topic, so being represented in the 4th box in the decision tree, is related to the global warming potential of the building. So the global warming potential is a measure that needs to be communicated as a numeric indicator for each life cycle stage on a reference period of 50 years. And the technical screening criteria imposes that this calculation must be disclosed on demand to investors and to the public. So this is the next step of the decision tree. Then the third point is to ensure that the construction designs and techniques support the circularity. Then if we check all these boxes and we go to the next slide for the fourth point, so this lists the maximum total amounts of primary raw material that are used in the construction. So this needs to be subtracted from the secondary raw material that are used in the works and need to meet those thresholds that you can see and that are defined in the technical screening criteria. Only after checking that for the 3 main materials you respect this criteria, you can go to the last checks, which is the 5th criteria, represented by the last 3 boxes that you can see on the slide, and relates to the use of electronic tools to describe the characteristics of the building, including the material and components that are used for the purpose of the maintenance, the recovery, and the reuse. So if you complete this and are able to demonstrate the substantial contribution of your building or project to circular economy, you can move to the do no significant harm criteria that you can see on the next slide. So the do not significant harm criteria for circular economy relates to checks that we do at the level of each other environmental objective. And they have been updated for this specific objective. So for the climate change mitigation, it relates first to the extraction, storage, transport or manufacture of fossil fuel. And as a second criteria, making sure that the primary energy demand as displayed on the EPC, Energy Performance Certificate of the building, does not exceed the net zero building requirement. So this one was already existing for the 2 first environmental objectives. Then for climate change adaptation, similarly, it is the same generic criteria that are set out in the Appendix A, so meaning the same physical climate risk assessment, and adaptation solution that were already existing when you demonstrated substantial contribution to climate change mitigation. So no change on this one. Then on the protection of water, so for the construction of new buildings, you can demonstrate that you do not significantly harm this objective by having certification on water appliances that will set the limit on water use of those appliances. On pollution prevention and control, the criteria are related to the emissions, the noise and other pollutions that are related to the building components and all the materials that are used in the construction. Finally, on the biodiversity and ecosystem objective, there is a reference to the Appendix D, and the Appendix D covers the completion of an environmental and impact assessment that has to be done at the level of the project. And finally, the last criteria in this objective is to ensure that the construction was not built on a forest or over greenfield land. Then, after demonstrating this do no significant harm on the other objective, you can move to the minimum safeguard that you have displayed on the next slide, sorry. And basically, there have been no really substantial changes on the checks that need to be done in order to ensure that the activity is carried out in compliance with those minimum social and governance safeguards. The only change or update is that the OECD guidelines have been updated in June 2023 to provide updated recommendations for responsible business conduct across some new areas such as climate change, biodiversity, use of technology, business integrity, and supply chain due diligence. So we made sure to integrate these into the guidelines and highlighted the changes. But basically, the minimum safeguard check is the same as it was previously. So that's it for the practical example going through the circular economy objective. And I will now leave the floor to the next presenter for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much. Very briefly, in the next slide, we wanted to highlight and emphasize the phased-in timeline for implementation of the EU Taxonomy, which is also in line with the CSRD regulation. We have pointed out the conditions, I would say, for companies that need to fulfill to be obliged to report on EU taxonomy and also on CSRD regulation. Also very interesting, just for you to have in mind the obligation for entities or for groups, right, that are even outside the EU with a certain level of business in Europe to actually start reporting on CSRD. The phased-in approach is interesting to have in mind, also to understand what data will be available. And when we say, obviously, what data is available, this doesn't mean that, the KPIs will be extremely high. So if I go back to the banks and the need of them reporting on green asset ratio, we see that they're very much interested in also financing. I saw there was a question in the Q&A. They are interested in financing actually the transition. This is one of the, let's say, opportunities that they have identified. So they want to provide loans. Nevertheless, there are certain products that indeed, as Julie provided you already with the answer, request directly and final aligned information, right, and aligned activities. Nevertheless, when we are discussing, even with banks or with smaller companies, we tell them that if they want to obtain, good ratings or good loans, or if they want to contribute to the or overall sustainability frameworks, they can already think of aligning their activities with the EU taxonomy, even if they do not fall into the scope as of today. This would be all on my side on the timeline. Julie, did you have anything else in mind to add for this? We are approaching the closing as well.
Nothing else to add, just that again, it's quite important that on the CSRD, a big part of the EU-based company will be in the scope starting FY25, reporting in 26. So it means that at that moment, the level of information on the EU taxonomy alongside CSRD information will substantially increase, and it will be also easier to get additional market insight and to really see, observing where the flow of investment and funds and financing are going in terms of renovation and in terms of real estate activities.
Thank you, Julie. And last but not least, a very short update on different jurisdictions in Europe. If we can pass on to the last slide. We saw that, for example, in France, the National Observatory for Energy Renovation, they came and provided more information with regards to the top 15 buildings. And we are talking about thresholds in terms of consumptions that we have added in the guidelines. We thought that this is an important update for the market that we could also emphasize during our presentation, and obviously during the inside the document, inside the guidelines. Having said that, on our side, this would be all that we wanted to emphasize for the brief presentation today. I pass on to Hassan now, and obviously we are also open on taking questions from you. If you want to ask something live, please go ahead or leave it in the chat. You can also share your questions afterwards with Hassan and the team if you have further difficulties in either going through the guidelines or implementing the EU taxonomy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Raluca, Lucy, and Julie, for your insights regarding the newly published EU Taxonomy Guidelines, and of course, explaining and elaborating for our members how it might impact their business. As Raluca mentioned, please feel free to send in your questions via the Q&A option on via Zoom. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to EPRA's sustainability team as well, and we will respond to you accordingly. I probably mentioned at the start of the webinar, we have an FAQ document that we published earlier this year. We will be updating it based on questions received from our members, and that will be available on the EPRA website as well. Just to add, the link for the updated guidelines was added on the chat part. So if you open up the chat function on Zoom, you can see the link to the updated EU Taxonomy Guidelines. Yeah, and just regarding the presentation and the recording itself, it will be available on the EPRA website events section later today. Great. I see there are no open questions from the attendees. So I would like to take this opportunity again to thank Sandy, Julie, Raluca, and Lucy for the presentation today, but also the support in producing the updated EU Taxonomy Guidelines. We at EPRA, the events team, sustainability team, look forward to continue supporting the membership. Please feel free to reach out if in case of any questions or queries. With that, I would like to close today's webinar. Thank you everyone for attending. Have a good day.